Meine Teile, mein Name ist Shimon Balitzky. Beim Unhalt von dasigen Überblick wegen Umkommen in jüdische Geworden.
Dear friends, my name is Shimon Balitzky. I now live with my family in the state of Israel, but I was born in Poland to a traditional Jewish family of working people. When the war broke out, my destiny was like the destiny of all Jews under the control of the Nazi conquerors. I was imprisoned in the ghetto. I fought in the anti-fascist underground. Most of my family was destroyed, and I was sent from one concentration camp to another. 6 years of Hitler's hell on earth were written very deeply in my memory, and I looked forward to the day that I would be able to memorialize the terrible events of that period. When the fall of the Nazis approached, I began to realize my aim. I made notes. I drew figures and scenes of concentration camp life. At the end of the war, I made my way through a number of camps and ghettos where I gathered material and other information that I felt should never be forgotten. Much of this evidence formed the basis of an art exhibition, a part of which I am presenting to you with the hope that you will better understand the tragedy that befell millions of innocent victims of the most extreme form of racial cruelty. Before us is a shtetl, the typical Jewish community of Eastern Europe in the 1930s. Here, Jews lived on narrow streets, in modest houses, or crowded apartments that were often used as workhouses, shops, and offices. The people earned their livings as bakers, painters, shoemakers, carpenters, glaziers, peddlers, and other simple tradesmen. On the Sabbath and holidays, Jewish homes were filled with high spirits. Folk people gathered around a friendly table set with bread and herring, and sometimes a bottle of whiskey. They sang and laughed and talked about politics and the coming of the Moshiach. In this painting, the street and market are full of life and sound. The gayness during the holidays of Simchat Torah and Purim knew no bounds. Colorful parades of children filled the streets on these days with laughter and gaiety. The people of the shtetl lived with the hope that the bad, as the good, was something that would pass, and someday it would be good. Their main concern was that no war would break out. And the worst did come, like thunder out of a clear blue sky. A deep consciousness and panic gripped the Jewish community. Where to escape? European countries are closed to Jews. There is no immigration to overseas countries. Mobilization in Poland is imminent. Jewish mothers and a pregnant woman are wondering, what will be the destiny of our sons and our husbands? But young Jewish men don't wait long, and in the year 1939 take their places in the front lines of the armies of France, Belgium, Holland, Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, Poland, and Russia. Many thousands of Jewish fighting men lost their lives in German prisoner of war camps. Jews fought with strength and courage from the beginning of the war until the end, and the impression that they submitted without resistance and went like sheep to the slaughter was designed to degrade the Jewish nation and to destroy its pride. Strong independent nations with large territories, armies, and resources performed no better than the Jews. After conquering Poland, the Nazis planned to make that country the center of Jewish annihilation. The Jews tried to run away and find shelter in different cities among their Gentile friends. In great danger, many went to Russia. Those with money were able to escape to countries like Australia and the United States. The free world remained silent, and the Nazis took advantage of the Jews being friendless and alone. Jewish wealth and other possessions were taken away. Their villages, homes, and synagogues were burnt and destroyed. Jews were made to wear yellow patches with a white ribbon and a star. Every person from age 14 to 60 was called to hard labor. Old people were made to clean the streets with toothbrushes and forced to repair roads with tablespoons. Men had their beards and earlocks torn out and were tortured in ways that no human beings ever suffered. Old religious Jews saw this as an act of God and prayed, read Tehillim in cemeteries, gathered quietly in synagogues, and like on high holy days, opened the holy arks and called for God's help. It was the beginning of 1940 that Jews began to realize their terrible fate. In small groups, they fled from their villages to the mountains and forests, where they dug bunkers and underground hiding places. Some formed underground resistance groups. Others joined the partisans, the local population that resisted the Germans. Partisan activities included the sabotaging of munition dumps, trains carrying German soldiers, and military encampments. Tired and hungry, but determined to continue their resistance, the partisans returned to their hideouts in preparation for the next battle. Beginning in 1940, Jews were forced into ghettos, crowded living quarters surrounded by high walls and barbed wires. The Nazis and their helpers rounded up tens of thousands of Jews in the ghetto and transported them to concentration camps. Children were separated from their parents, husbands from their wives. The old, the sick, and the children were detained for days and nights until they were taken to their deaths. The first to be destroyed was always the crippled, the sick, the old, and the feeble. These poor souls didn't know what was happening to them and just couldn't understand what those creatures in black and brown wanted from them. The Nazi assassins killed with pleasure and sadism. Innocent children were placed in front of machine guns and shot down, putting them into early graves with their brothers and sisters. Of the 6 million Jews who were killed by the Nazis, approximately 1 million were children. Jewish cargo entering the concentration camp were welcomed with the slogan, "Work makes free." As the gates were closed behind them, they were pounced upon, beaten, and cursed. They were ordered to undress. All personal possessions were taken away. They were given prisoners' clothing of gray material with dark stripes and wooden shoes. Besides having to wear yellow patches on their uniforms, Jews were branded on their arms with identification numbers. Those who resisted were savagely beaten. Women prisoners were shocked that the women guards were as cruel as the men guards. The prisoners' personal belongings consisted of a tin bowl and plate. Their food was leftover scraps, a piece of stale bread, a piece of fat, and soup made of rotted potato peels. Any personal effect found on a prisoner, other than the bowl and plate, meant death. Prisoners were locked in crowded rooms with small gated windows. They slept in 4s and 5s on single wooden racks with straw mattresses. Bugs and other crawling creatures made rest impossible. Let's look for a moment at this painting called Sleeping as a Punishment, and you will understand more clearly the Nazi method of destroying the strength and mentality of their prisoners. After a day of hard labor and of standing in assemblies and going through heavy punishment exercises, tens of women were placed in small circular enclosures with their bodies very close to one another and their feet folded so that the slightest move by one would cause everyone to move, waking up everyone. The prisoners' lives were in constant danger. Commanded by police and armed guards, they were marched miles to factories, fields, ports, and quarries, where they were made to work under the most unsafe physical conditions. In equally great danger were the prisoners who worked with glycerin, trotol, and acetone, chemicals and powders used in making explosives. Contact with their bodies caused loss of hair and weight, skin blemishes, and change of skin color. Young, beautiful girls turned ugly and old. My eyes could not believe what they saw. With extreme cruelty, the Nazis transported tens of thousands of prisoners into territories conquered from Russia. Camp commandants selected their strongest prisoners and sent them to Leningrad and Smolensk, where they were used to connect the rails of the broad Russian railway to the narrower railways of Poland, Romania, Germany, and Prussia. Many contracted tuberculosis and pneumonia and froze in the snow. Of 8,000 workers in one section of Leningrad, 200 remained, most of whom died later of a variety of sicknesses. The methods of mental torture were no less cruel than the physical tortures. Prisoners were made to dig holes and then fill them up, carry sand from one place to another and then back. They were made to put up buildings and then ordered to tear them down, and then ordered to rebuild them. In desperation, many fled aimlessly in the direction of electrical posts, where they were electrocuted, to barbed wire fences, where they gashed themselves, and into deep mud, where many drowned. To calm the prisoners, camp guards told them that they would undergo sanitary treatment in a bath in order to cleanse themselves, and then they would be able to get a job and have a normal life in the camp. After bathing, they were led into another room, which was another bath. This one, a bath of cyclone gas. I have tried to touch the horror of this experience in this painting, but it is a tiny echo of the true gas chamber. Not always did these victims go passively. This group of old and wise men is determined to resist with every ounce of strength left in their old bodies. The Nazi lust to kill reached its peak when they discovered that the Wehrmacht, the German regular army, had met defeat. Prisoners who made suspicious moves were locked in bunkers without food or water. For the slightest act of insubordination, or simply to satisfy Nazi sadism, camp doctors tore out prisoners' nails and teeth. Men were kicked savagely in their genital organs. Some were tied down into barrels under icy cold running water until, drip by drip, they were drowned, as you see in this painting. During the nighttime, prisoners covered with sackcloths were taken out of their barracks and thrown into an open field under hot and blinding spotlights and reflectors. Group torture was no different from individual torture. To cleanse the prisoners of lice, the Nazis made them undress and sit in the snow. Despite all of these tortures, many gained incredible strength with which they were able to resist. They damaged equipment, attacked Nazi collaborators, and when outside the camp, hid sick and crippled prisoners. They took advantage of every moment that the guards relaxed their watch and got into storerooms where they ate any food that they found. They ate their food as fast as they could, in fear of being caught, as you see in this painting. Not always were they successful. Often, in the midst of getting food, a prisoner was caught by the police or by a German farmer and killed for taking either an egg, a piece of cheese, bread, or a potato. In the fall of 1943, 2 prisoners, naval officers in the service of Holland, escaped from the camp. They were noticed by a German civilian who alerted the police. Caught, they were chained to the bottom of a truck and dragged back to the camp. For that occasion, the Nazis called out all prisoners for a special assembly and put out barrels of the best foods, soups, meats, fish, bread, and fruit. The camp commandant lectured about the great German Reich and the solution to the Jews, and warned of death to those who tried to escape. To the sound of festive music, the 2 men were hanged. The prisoners remained still. No one touched the food. In wild anger, the guards began attacking everyone within their reach. Dozens were thrown dead into pits, dying a holy death. The result of this murderous act brought the prisoners closer together and strengthened their morale and resistance. Quietly, they organized group activities under the supervision of teachers and other educated prisoners. They gave courses to finish the education of the young. They lectured on subjects of Jewish history. Artists and other talented prisoners entertained. Religious prisoners in tallis and tefillin prayed to God, raising the hopes of many who turned to God for help. When the Sabbath came, prisoners dreamed of a table set with candles, challah, and wine. Not wanting to forget, they made all kinds of models, including miniatures of a Sabbath table. They spoke all night, hoping that they would once again enjoy a normal life. At great risk to their lives, prisoners in hard labor helped one another, saving a dying person by giving him a glass of water or a piece of bread. These were everyday occurrences in the camps. In ghettos that were not yet destroyed, like Vilna, Krakow, and Bialystok, Jews put up strong fronts and fought with great courage. Jews in the ghetto prepared for a long fight. They built bunkers, barricades, fortifications, and ways to escape. Armed, they fought with the police and the SS. Their resistance forced the Nazis to bring in more armor and soldiers. The fight for survival in the Warsaw Ghetto lasted 40 days. 7,000 Jews fought and died, with the enemy suffering unexpectedly high casualties. After their losses in the ghettos, and with the tide of the war going badly against them, the Nazis began destroying thousands of prisoners and all traces of their machinery of genocide. Jews secretly marked the graves of their brothers and sisters and swore that they would take revenge. Thousands of starving prisoners, forced to march in the cold and rain, fell dead along the road. When the stronger prisoners offered to carry their weaker comrades, the SS refused to let them do so. Many prisoners saved their lives in the confusion caused by the Nazis' retreat. As the end approached, the SS, filled with fear, fled at night. On May the 8th, 1945, the survivors of the Holocaust were freed. But how great was the tragedy of the Jews? Those who survived were led past horrible scenes of dead victims. People tried to make one another feel good by expressing the hope that perhaps friends and family were alive elsewhere. They soon found out that the Holocaust had hurt everyone. Thousands of sick, weak, and confused prisoners remained in the camps, while tens of thousands, bearing ghastly memories of the past, returned to the countries from which they were driven, trying to start their lives over again. Most of them went to the new Jewish country, where they were sure that they would find security. Nazi racism brought great tragedy and suffering to the lives of many nations. Hurt most were the Jews, who lost 1/3 of their nation. Have racism and anti-Semitism reared their ugly heads again? My experience tells me that the safeguards against the growth of these evils lie in swift and united action by the free nations of the world in tearing out their early roots. I shall conclude with an age-old Jewish saying: maybe someday it will be good.